Welcome to the Art of War in the Wild mini conference. I'm your host, Sayal Her. This mini conference is composed of a few panel conversations focused on the real world application of timeless wisdom. The backdrop is that we are in a world experiencing a leadership crisis on a global scale across various dimensions, both personal and professional, private and public, among many other dimensions, resulting in widespread struggle and suffering. Much of what we are experiencing stems from embracing an almost Pollyannish perspective that romanticizes leadership, human nature, and reality, sterilizes our organizations and enterprises, and infantilizes people in leadership roles, among others. When in reality, we should be embracing a more realistic perspective that integrates every aspect of human nature and reality, including the good, the bad, and the ugly. The Art of War, or the Sun Tzu, provides profound timeless insights into leadership, strategy, culture, conflict, execution, and much more, offering approaches for surviving and thriving in today's reality. The objective of these conversations is to engage a few forward thinkers and forward doers who are reshaping the modern world through the wisdom of the art of war, to explore the gap between principles and practice where reality and theory converge, to explore applying ancient wisdom to modern day scenarios, highlighting the dynamics between intentions and outcomes, and to illuminate insights for engaging in challenging environments. Welcome to the Art of War in the Wild mini conference.
Hello and welcome.
Welcome. Nice to see you.
Hello.
It is a privilege and honor to be with all three of you all around. And thank you for making the time to participate on this panel.
A pleasure.
Nice to be here.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited.
You're most welcome. You're most welcome. We welcome everyone in our audience, and you've got a little bit of backdrop as to why we're here. I don't want to waste any time from these wonderful human beings that will share a lot with us. Would love for you folks to introduce yourself, and perhaps we could just start with Cynthia and go all around.
Gladly. Good day, everyone. Cynthia Chambers here. I am in the IT space over 35 years in corporate America, and my various roles in the software development lifecycle, from project management, Scrum Master, and lastly, transformation coach. I had the pleasure of having my life, or my world, my normal wrecked, let me say that, for 18 months by a certain someone. And that someone is Mr. Sai here. If I thought we were going right, we went left. If I thought we were going down, we went up. He just wrecked my normal. It's going to be my book, in fact. But yes, I'm happy to be here, and I'll share a little bit more about everything else later.
Welcome. Christine, would love to hear your voice.
Yes. Good afternoon. So Christine Ferraro, trained as an engineer. Please don't hold that against me as we come through the conversation here today. Been working in the utility space since I came out of college. So Cynthia, I was not as brave as you to share the years, but in the 30s, numbers of years. Very recently made a switch from a very large investor-owned utility in Pennsylvania to a number of years ago, joining a private enterprise and working and running a private utility system. So in a very large, heavily matrixed organization, have learned a lot of lessons working there, and the art of war applies so well. So looking forward to the conversation with the group today.
Wonderful. And Holly, last but never least.
Hi, Holly Fiorello, also in the technology sector. I am in marketing for SaaS companies since right out of college. And as we get into it, I was just thinking about the first time I read The Art of War was right out of college. It was a much different experience than now after, a few different positions under my belt under the last 15 years.
Excellent. Excellent. So ladies, would love to start off with the first question is, what does the art of war really mean to you? Anyone would like to start, if you will?
I'll jump in. my first experience with the art of war was pretty emotional at first. And that was because I came from a mindset of all conflict is bad conflict. And so holding tight on the reins of control, I prided myself on trying to keep peace and everything in order. And that was wearing me out. And so to come across the art of war as a coaching manual, I was introduced to the inside of the cover where it talks about how to handle conflict without aggression. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Is this, something that's going to talk to my dysfunction and give me the strategy on how to use it and navigate, life with. So that was my first introduction to the art of war. And I am forever grateful because it has impacted every area of my life and how I show up, how I deal with people, and how I help people. So,
Cynthia, I highlighted that part in the book as well, How to Conquer Without Aggression. I feel as, personally, my experience, I feel as a woman in tech and, leadership, that we are taught that, conflict can be healthy, but it also, if you try to formulate some of your other peers who have conflict, that never really worked for me. So to How to Conquer Without Aggression really kind of speaks to still having those leadership skills to get everybody where you want them to be without having to, make everyone super uncomfortable and not feel like I'm being true to myself.
It's so interesting to hear you both say that. In my career, I've had the benefit of a coach, an executive coach at one point, and that administered many tests to me to find out who I was and my personality. And there was one particular assessment I remember that came back that talked about power. And my power score was very low, very low. She said, I have never seen anyone with such a low power score. And I said, well, I don't really believe in that, right? I don't believe in that, that use of power. And I guess we would say power over, right? Don't believe in that use of power. But it's really, as I've matured in my leadership style, it's really about that influence, right? That building of that influence and not having to apply aggression, right? And I came across the art of war introduced through my husband. We learn from everyone in our lives, and it's such a gift. But he said, well, you do this and you do this, and he used all those words that were in the book. And I said, oh, I don't think I do any of that, and I really don't think that's who I am. And then I read it, I said, oh, I think I do that, should do that, and it's really very applicable. I agree, Cynthia, in every aspect of your life. And Holly, I think it's interesting too from a woman's perspective, where we are taught forever, right, to kind of smile and viewed even in the workplace, probably just a little differently still, if we're more assertive than a man would be, and taught to be very polite. And but it's a fine balance. But I appreciated that, Cynthia. I think it was a wake up call for me when I read it too.
Huge impact.
So you really touched on a lot of great stuff, ladies. Incredible stuff. One of the particular ones is, and I really want to hone in on this one, see what you think. Others observe it. If I use the language of the sage commander, if you will, as you are in that role, others will observe it, and they let you know. It sounds like, Christine, you had that experience relative to your husband, and please elaborate, and others likewise comment on others observing you as such.
Well, it's interesting. We have a lot of talk about work at home. Everyone's different with their significant other if you chat about work at home, but we come home and talk about a lot of things about, going into this conversation at work and wanted to make sure there was a great outcome. So reached out to this person in advance and really reached out to this person in advance and knew I had those allies and all of those things going in and all of that laying ground and all of that work going in. And that was the observation. It's, that's that sage commander. That's what you're doing. And I saw some of that in myself reflected as I did it, but then I saw some opportunity too. I think even in a personal world, the act of taking whole and leaving whole, right? I think sometimes even when we get at work and we strive to be right, or we have those times when it can feel really good, right? To have that moment where you're like, boy, they've been after us a while, and I really got you. I got in that meeting, right? And I really had my say, and I really got you. But in business, the enemy doesn't go away, right? Whoever you had in that meeting that you just had that conversation with, that coworker, that peer, that other department, there's another day when they're going to come and show up. But if you haven't left them whole, it's very applicable. And I find that in those moments where you really thought, oh, I really had my say, you're not the best, you are not the sage commander. And Cynthia, I don't know how you found that in your personal life, but it's an interesting place to come from, to always want to be at that calm and not act in that aggressive way. Cynthia, I don't know if I was interested in your remarks. I don't want you to share too much about your personal life if you're not comfortable, but it was so vulnerable for you to say that. I'd be interested to hear more.
So my dysfunction spilled out in my wanting to be a peacemaker, and I would try and suppress other people's conflicts, if you will. Like if they had something to say, like, no, let's not rustle any feathers and so forth. And what I found is people are always looking at you. They're always watching you. And I had nothing to do with the conflict. Here I am imposing my peacemaking abilities, if you will. And them speaking up and having a voice to be able to say, no, I want to be able to voice whatever my concern is, and, the whole nine. And so looking at it from a personal perspective, they told me before I knew that I had an issue with conflict because they saw how I was responding to it. Professionally, as a Scrum Master, your team is always looking at you to see whether or not you're fair, you have integrity, they're watching you. And so they could tell whether or not, and they saw a big change in me from prior to the Art of War and then after the Art of War, where it was more of a win-win rather than a win-lose or a lose-lose. It was how I was showing up with the problem-solving aspect of it, where everybody's got to win. And so I think the Art of War speaks to, especially the Sage Commander, having to treat the enemy. We would want to gut the enemy, leave them with nothing. But the Sage Commander is like, oh no, we're going to use it to our advantage. And he actually incorporates that into the whole of everything. So I definitely saw an increase in my approach and the way I dealt with individuals after the Art of War, how they saw me.
Wonderful. How your thoughts are kind of how that, that kind of entered your life?
Just kind of like just everything you're saying, ladies, are just resonating and bringing up so many memories with me. But kind of thinking, like, I noticed for a bit that I started getting asked to be involved in discussions or conversations to help kind of mediate conflicts that had nothing to do with my department. And when I was a little bit younger, I would definitely go more towards the peacekeeping rather than trying to find what the expected solution should be. And as I got a little bit older, like through having those experiences and being in those rooms and being encouraged for, like, what do you think? How do we get them there, to kind of walk them through? It's such a skill. Like, and just thinking, like, it's people skills, right? Emotional intelligence, but there's also some strategy behind it. So one of my other highlights were 100 victories and 100 battles is not the most skillful. Subduing the other's military without battle is the most skillful. And that's something that when I worked with Sai would help me with too. And I would think that there was just a very obvious outcome, and that why couldn't this person just get to where that I needed them to be? And Sai would help me understand how that person was feeling, how I need to approach things, how to work with them to get us to that win-win, rather than, me just try to be quick with time and efficient to get where I needed, feeling that I already had that ownership of the situation and executive direction.
So you folks bring up some more interesting aspects to dive deeper in so many different directions. One thing that catches my attention, quite honestly, is that a sage is recognized. The sage does not claim sageness, which is very, very underlying kind of all your stories. You almost don't know you're a sage until somebody tells you, wait a minute, there's something going on here that you're doing that's magical. And thank goodness someone is recognizing that. Also, the emphasis on, and I'm going to use the word that I would use, there's a lot of conditioning that we encounter that we think, right, conflict is negative, when the reality is we should be learning how to work with conflict. And exactly. And really the power with, I think you emphasize the power with versus the power over, which has a lot of roots in Judith Glaser's work, actually, which again, a lot of us are familiar with. So a great set of aspects. I want to dive into stories, but I got to ask a different question very, very, very critically, because we have a unique audience here with you three. Is there a difference for how a male versus a female might interpret the art of war, and the wisdom is what I'm referring to, and then how they show up, how they instantiate it? And you folks have touched on that, but please elaborate kind of the gender dimensionality to it.
Yeah, I'll start, and please jump in, because I don't know. I wasn't expecting this question, so I'm not prepared for this. So we're going to wait inside.
Okay.
I think that as a woman, and particularly in a leadership role, I think that there's a challenge, right? Because you're expected to be assertive. There's I've had a number of women that have worked for me on my team that were introverts and did not choose to speak in settings and looked at as peacekeepers, and they were unable to promote. And I worked for men at the time that said, boy, you just really have to work with her. You've really got her to jump in and speak her mind. And they were unable to do that. And they were not promoted to the executive level because of that. But on the flip side, I've seen women be judged for being too assertive, right? And all of those connotations that come with it. So I think the art of war is even more important. Being that sage commander is even more important, right? Because it's really all about pulling that the bow back, right? Because if you let that fly as a woman, it's just not going to work. You're going to be judged. You'll be held poorly. But that ability to influence outcomes and gather people to you, right, and build that informal, influential power base it's probably a very critical skill set for a woman, because it's such a fine line. And I don't know, what do you think, Cynthia? I see you nodding, and Holly too. What are y'all thinking? Have you been there? I've let that arrow fly a couple of times. I'm like, oh dang, that was not the right time. Shouldn't have done that one. But what do you think?
Well, for me, Christine, just hearing the two perspectives, the one that talks up and the one that doesn't, and just to see that distinction between them. I didn't get a job once because I went on an interview, and it was for a project management position. And they said, the feedback was they didn't think I was strong enough. And I'm like saying, wow, how do you come across in an interview, because you're trying to show your best side, that you can put your foot in somebody's behind, and so they were like, yeah, we just think you're too nice, and it was all based on an interview. And so I understand the challenge that we have, women, to walk that fine line, to say enough to have a voice, but not enough to be discounted. In corporate America, because I'm dating myself again, but I was maybe 2 or 3 in a class of computer science majors. The rest were all men. And so that's where the conditioning started back, and so I came into corporate America, thinking that I needed position power when I really needed
Mhm.
influence power.
Mhm.
And I think that the difference with men and women is men have a position power, and women have an influence power. And this is
Mhm.
in general outside of corporate America, within your home, like
Mhm.
Mhm.
has that influence power. And if we know how to wield it,
Mhm.
it will do us great service
Mhm.
and not be so into the position power and take it
Mhm.
from a position perspective. But no, I totally agree with your statement.
It's a challenge to not be too stereotypical in terms of, how I would see. I'm not necessarily sure, how the other gender in terms of the art of war, what that would mean to them. I've been very lucky to be in companies where I've always felt like I was an equal to my peers of the other gender. But I also am in a niche industry that is, 70% older gentlemen, and that's not always the case when you walk into some of those rooms. And it always kind of takes me a little bit by surprise. I am a millennial, so I feel like I've had like equal, the feminists paved the way for me along the way. So I'm getting to benefit from a lot of those initiatives. But when it does happen, that to me, I think they're a little surprised too that I will take up space and not in, you know, I tried, like you said, you are punished sometimes for being too assertive. I've My brothers will say I have that problem, but I haven't had any of my colleagues say that yet. But in terms of, if it is imposter syndrome. Maybe for them, the art of war is more about the strategy behind
Mhm.
shaping forces rather than
Mhm.
the commanding respect and building relationships where
Mhm.
technically I think are more predisposed to focus on the relationship side.
Well said.
Yeah. Forgive me if others had comments, please, relative to Holly or Christine or Cynthia.
Well, something that came to mind is wondering whether or not, how they say the male species, is just headliners, just the facts.
Mhm.
And so to take hold would kind of force them to take in a whole bunch more information,
Mhm.
so much more data to kind of see where the opportunity presents itself. So I think a male would be challenged more than a female, only because it comes very easy for the
Mhm.
the woman to have 10 things going on at one time, and still being aware of what else has been added to the environment, where a male might not have that consciousness, ongoing.
That is interesting.
Mhm. Mhm.
And really the question, if I can sort of clarify the question, particularly for as I've asked it, or the listeners or those that may listen to the recording, the question, and I love the word that you mentioned, Holly, the question isn't really honing in on the stereotypical or not, but rather it's the evolutionary biology that we have masculine energy, right, and feminine energy.
Mhm.
That mix exists within all of us. And the way that it's wielded, is very powerful. I mean, I'm very, and I've said this very publicly, the best leaders I've encountered happen to have more feminine energy than masculine energy, and they know how to wield it. AKA, most of them are females. And I stand behind that just from my own experience. So it is interesting. It is interesting. So how about stories, ladies? Stories that you can share with us where your wisdom is manifested, and we can explore a little bit and dive in.
Kind of not moving on quite yet because I love the conversation where you're going. I was thinking from a coaching perspective of when we've been put in the quadrants, right? And who's like the high drive and who's the more relational. I think that kind of works with the feminine masculine energy as well. Like depending on where you are in terms of your, themes on where you would want to focus. So
Very well said.
for
Yeah,
the Oh, I was gonna say the biggest one is I started reading, rereading again at the beginning of the year, Psy, and it was right after we led our company through a very successful acquisition. We're merging in, integrated, and the part that like really stood out to me during all of this, because it's my world had been pretty much the same for 8 years. We'd grown, successful, comfortable. You know, you get in your role, you get used to things, but it was feeling at home in chaos. Uh, and it's just, you know, as you're saying, there's all these things that are moving that you're aware of. And I had to get comfortable with being at home in the chaos and not trying to control and manipulate everything. And once that I made that approach while I'm, you know, reading this and thinking about, you know, the mountain's still going to be there, you know, use the mountain to your advantage, not trying to, you know, push the rock up the mountain. That's not the best use of your resources. Wait till it's the right time. And you're just existing to be aware of without trying to put my own control and pressure on them.
Yeah, very powerful, especially in acquisition. There's, forgive me for interrupting you. I think Christine, maybe so many forces in an acquisition, even trying to conceptualize what those forces might be is potentially next to impossible.
Yeah, Holly, I went back and reread it too and thought about that, the chaos aspect as well. And I hate to bring us back to less happy times, but I was running a utility during COVID. And in a very unique set of circumstances, the customers just closed, you know, just kind of closed, right? And weren't using energy or electricity, right? So revenue was down, right? And it's the same with every business has the same experience, just called something different. So revenue is down and fixed expenses are high, right? So lots of pull to cut costs, cut people, right? And you know, across the board had to be me. So, you know, it was an interesting time for me. You know, I love the phrase in the art of war that talks about preserving people, right? So it kind of started negotiating, you know, well, what is the target? How much do you need? And can I reorganize? Like, can I, instead of just going across the board, you know, is it okay if I come in and do something so that we come out smarter than we go in? Because if we just cut, you know, and a lot of people were forced to do that, and it wasn't probably a bad decision if you had to make that. But, you know, were we able to, you know, spend some time and take advantage of the chaos, run a little short, but come back better, and was able to successfully do that and reorganize and keep the organization intact and keep as many people as possible together. So really just reformed, but it was the chaos. There was opportunity there. I can't even imagine a merger and acquisition, how much opportunity occurs in that space. But COVID was a very, very challenging time to come through and keep the team together as much as possible, at least in the space that I was in.
Well said.
Awesome.
Cynthia, did you have any thoughts at all relative to some of the stories or other stories?
Once Holly mentioned mergers and acquisitions, I had a flashback of a department they put me in charge of. We were newly acquiring some stores and some brands. Let me say that. And there was a hole in the environment where all the moving parts for an acquisition and a merger coming into a big company needs to hit all the wheel spokes, but all the wheel spokes weren't at the table. And so it's like the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing. And it was a perfect opportunity to merge the internal happenings before we make a front to the external world and receive that acquisition. And knowing who to talk to, I think this is where the art of war came in for me, because it was like you could talk at the one level where they'll have to go talk to somebody and they'll have to go talk to someone and there's a loss in communication. Or you can say, you know what, let's take action and go straight to the source and have the other parties at the table. So you say it once and you hit it all at one time. I found to be a huge plus for us, because you had the help from the other spokes to chime in and say what it was feeling like when they got it after the company already merged in, being 2-3 months later, getting involved in something that they should have been well in advance at the table, knowing what was going on. So I think just me using the opportunity to bring those that I want in the conversation with the ones that were the decision makers to be a huge reward, because the company was able to, start to even contemplate, that path forward with everybody being at the table as soon as we signed the ink is dry, opposed to, oh, they've been here for 3 months and now we need to get them involved in our HR, our marketing, our accounting, so. But,
Yeah. Like conditions are always changing. You don't need to use the same system that you would when the conditions were different. Being able to evolve for the situation.
On a play-by-play.
Yep.
Yes, definitely.
So, ladies, if you return to those scenarios, put yourself back in those situations, and I really kind of want to extract the insights that I think the audience will really benefit from beyond what you've already said. I mean, tremendous contribution, whether it's M&A, the COVID and disruptions that we encounter, right? The turbulence relative to brands, etc. In those moments, if you could recollect, what were you telling yourself to help you become more comfortable in the chaos? What was that personal conversation respectfully like?
My mantra was ride the wave. Some version of going with the flow, but also feeling like I had a little bit of control over whether or not I stayed on top of the surfboard or if I, submerged and got buried underneath the wave. Just kind of being a part of the chaos.
Yeah, I mean, I think I love that, riding the wave. My expression is always that we'll get through this, right? I think that that firm belief that you can navigate it, right? And riding the wave is even better because there are ups and downs, right? So it's not a linear path, as we'll get through this. But I really that knowing there's an outcome on the other side that you can, I think, Holly, the same thing that you said, that you can influence and that you're a part of, and having that belief that you can see that end. And the win-win too, really. I think it's the end in the win-win. I mean, it's not, the objective is never, I think, Cynthia, your perspective was it's an inclusive, right? We want everyone to be a part of the conversation and everyone to be invited in, and going in, knowing that you can get there with a merger and acquisition or through a business disruption. I think it's really that focus on, it's going to come out the other side and we're going to come out together and it's going to be okay.
And I think that's what's going through my head when those opportunities is win-win. It's always got that win-win in there. Never looking for a win-lose or lose-lose. Really, it's a win-lose or lose-win. It's all in how you see it. But yeah, what I hear in my head, Sai, is win-win. Anytime I'm confronted with chaos, it's win-win. How am I coming out of this so that everybody involved wins?
It is interesting, though, how our society describes success, though, right? Because a success is a clear win, and it's not, and there has to be a lose associated with it, or you really didn't win, right? You look at any sort of comparison in business, right? It's anything that there would be a corollary, right? Well, the successor, got to this earnings per share, but the new person couldn't get there, right? And there's always a description and a comparison to someone else that implies a loss, right? We don't seem to be able to describe success as a win-win, right? Well, this was well done and this was well done. Maybe it's because there's not enough emotional response there, but it doesn't seem to be how we express things in our society.
I find with the teams that when you listen to at the core, it's that perception that they have as to success and why someone has to lose, and where the breakdown in that inclusiveness comes into play. Like, how can this be possible? You know, that everybody's coming out winning, where if you attack that mindset first, then they'll be more receptive to the whole of where you're going and able to go in uncharted waters with you. But you got to first get rid of some of the mess that's going on up in the mind. That will stop them from seeing, you know, while it's chaos, it's unknown, uncertainty, as we like to call it, right? Having the goal of win-win in those waters makes it less threatening. Makes it less threatening.
So you definitely, I'm going to grab a few words, kind of put them together and ask another question, if you will, because again, your insights are very, very valuable. The words that you've used, and I love the way you said it, some form of control, right? And riding the wave. So the element of control is there. Definitely power has the notion of power. And some of these words are taboo words, right? In our social context, but control, power, conflict, definitely navigate, you mentioned. The word energy underlies a lot of these things. Uncertainty, as you mentioned, amongst other words. How about situations perhaps where the win-win couldn't be achieved and it started really to go toward a win-lose in whatever form, or potentially lose-lose? Kind of any guidance or wisdom to shed on those circumstances and lessons learned that we can take from your experience?
Like a lose-lose. I would go back to the taking hold and see if there's a different pattern that is presenting itself. Because I must not be seeing at that point, if I'm seeing a lose-lose at that point, it's perhaps maybe I'm not seeing everything, all the opportunities that's available. And so I would look at the environment to see whether or not there's anything else that looks like a pattern, or maybe throw some different notes in to kind of create, I don't want to call it disturbance, but just to provoke just another level of awareness to see whether or not we can move past the current state that we're in. Because if we're at a lose-lose or a lose-win, then that I would think, let's go back to the drawing board and take hold again.
Yeah, I think, boy, now I feel a little bit of shame looking back on, but there in some of the situations, I have been in lose-wins when you've been in a business environment and decisions are made and there's good business reasons to do it, but there do end up being a consequence of where someone loses. I ran an operation and we consolidated decentralized locations into a central location. And there were definitely folks that felt the loss, right? That were in those locations that were closed, right? And then there were some people and they did not feel, and there wasn't a win-win to be had for those folks, right? It was a decision that had to be made and we had to move forward. I think it's really more about the voice being heard. Cynthia, I think that's what you're saying, right? You know, how are you engaging people in that conversation? How are they feeling as they come along the journey? Because there are some times when especially in business, when it would be, and maybe if we could have paused and gone back to the table, but I have been there where there's been decisions that have been made and there's alignment. I have a funny story. I was moved to a department at one time and had a new vice president that I ended up working for. And he gave me the format for his staff meetings. And he said, it's a very all voices heard environment. So I'm going to present an issue. We're going to have a discussion. Everyone will speak. And at the end, I will give my opinion. And then the discussion will be closed and the discussion will be over. And it was funny because I believe he felt like he was having very bringing everyone to the table, seeking everyone's opinion. But in the end, he really made the decision. And at that time, there was no dialogue. And I think sometimes, and I don't, even though I spoke, I don't think I felt heard. I think it was perfunctory, right? He was letting everyone speak, and he was still going to be the boss, and he was still going to make the decision at the end. And I think sometimes when we get into those situations that are super tough and there are hard decisions where there is a loss, whether it's an intentional loss or whether it's a felt loss by folks in our organizations, I think that's really the thing. Are you really listening? You know, are you just going around the table and hearing it, or are you trying to mitigate that loss and bring it closer to a win for all, is instead of just I often think of that, you know, and very polite conversation, but I don't know if others felt good when they were done with it, but I did not. So I've always tried to really have that listening. I think Holly and Cindy that you both described.
I think that's important. People want to be heard. They want to know that they're being heard. And I know for me, I was in a position where I had lost my voice because of the dysfunction in the organization. People in management that shouldn't be, and so forth. And so there's a dysfunction that's received from the other people that are working underneath that leadership. And then you have the dysfunction on the other end where the leadership that put them there, accountability. But the one thing I wanted was just someone to acknowledge the dysfunction that was going on. I mean, and while it didn't change anything, just acknowledge the fact that it's happening, it's here, you know, so that people aren't going home every day, you know, thinking that they're crazy. I'm not the only one that's seeing the fly on the wall, you know, and so forth. So to your point, being in those tough situations where it does seem like it's a lose-lose or a lose-win, or someone's losing, it might be the smallest thing just to be heard. That makes the difference. So I agree.
Probably your thoughts?
Mine is less of a personal story and more of just my knee-jerk reaction was to think about marketing. And if you're losing out on sales because your pricing's too high, and then you lower your price, and then your competitor lowers their price, and then you both are racing towards the bottom, that's a lose-lose situation, rather than trying to take the time to be more creative on coming up with some better options. I had a really hard time trying to think of a situation where we knew going into it would be a lose-lose, or maybe it was just something that we didn't know in the time going into it, but I just kept going back to the marketing example.
Yeah, I think that time aspect is important, as you talked about that. And I think if you look at everything that we would expect a sage commander to do, it's all time, right? You don't rush in.
Yeah.
You know, you take that time, you know yourself, you know the enemy. And I think in business sometimes decisiveness is rewarded. It's actually viewed very favorably. Yes. Oh, they're so crisp in their decision making. And it you know, and sometimes you could say, well, maybe we were rash, right? And maybe to your point, Cynthia, if we went back and you go back and you redesign, right, and you re-engage, you can find it. But I don't know that in business we often value that. You know, I think we typically find executives that are very decision oriented, right? I mean, I think we even had a recent conversation where I said we're going to make a decision at every meeting, and that's good, right? Because you want to value people's time, right? But the evaluation of a situation to get to that win-win can take longer, right? And it's very valued. That decisiveness is extremely, and we want to be action oriented, but we do want to pause until we find the win-win. But that was well said, Cynthia. That was great. That's something to think about. You know, we go back, right? We didn't get there yet. Very insightful.
So definitely a lot of good stuff that you're sharing with us. Very rarely, and please feel free to disagree with me, very rarely in very practical terms, can we remove all the loss so it's a win for everybody, especially under stresses, if you will, very, very strong stresses. So really taking whole, to take as whole as possible, right? Minimize the damage, the loss, if you will. And a few things that you folks really, really emphasized, which I think amongst many, the time factor is a big one, right? The time factor is underlying everything, the constraints under which we operate. But in addition to that, the integrative aspect, right? Did my voice get heard? Was it integrated in some way? And then being creative, right? If your three voices aren't respectfully to you three, if I'm not integrating your three voices, then I'm not being creative enough. And that those two dimensions are key. And to go to directly to the word that is in the art of war. All of this is from the inexhaustible, sheer, right? Energy and it's all those. It's inexhaustible. It's just really down to, are we creative enough or not, given the time constraints? So a lot of incredible things that you're sharing, folks. Other thoughts, kind of to chime in relative to sort of this thread of the conversation, ladies. I'm selfish. I'm seeking your wisdom. I'll put it that way. Very selfish. I know myself. I admit I'm very, very selfish. I acknowledge that. I own it.
I mean, I think. Oh, go ahead, Cynthia, please.
I was just going to add that one of the things I've noticed about me with regards to chaos is the more I embraced it, the less threatening it became.
That's, yeah.
The more I embraced it, the less. And like now, I'm able to walk into any given situation, any room, and ready to act based on what's in that room. My confidence is up because I'm now equipped with the tools. Every situation, to your point, Holly, is not the same. It's not cookie cutter. Like, you can't go in there, we're going to do the same thing we did the last time. No, it's not going to work. You really just need to be able to come into a situation, a room, or what have you, assess the environment, and then wait for the opportune time, back to patience, and make sure that you're flowing from a wait until the opportune time strikes rather than harsh decisions to be made. And even if it means we're still not ready to make a decision, be able to stand on that and hold back.
And also to be able to talk on why it's not smart to make that decision at this time. We're going back to the win-win, the lose-lose, like having an understanding of the forces.
Yeah, I mean, I think before I was introduced to the art of war, we used to talk went to a lot of trainings about mastery of self, right? And talking about, and Cynthia and Holly, I think you said it well, how do you bring yourself to that room and harness all of that energy, right? And all of that thoughtfulness and ability to influence, and knowing that you've done it in other situations and you could apply it where you are, and it just gets stronger, right, as you build that. So it's an interesting, that mastery of self is so critical and so important. And it's, I don't know that we value that. I think we made up a lot of other terms to talk about what that looks like in business, like emotional intelligence and knowing your impact on other people, right? I think, but we're really talking about knowing yourself and deliberately acting.
That's a true thing. Yeah, I totally agree. Because I believe if you're not the first partaker of the art of war for yourself, to deal with the inner conflict that you have within yourself, it's going to be hard to see it outside. So I always look at it as it's not what I do, it's who I am. And I found that I'm naturally taking hold. I'm naturally taking action based on this book. And it's not, it's not a cookie cutter. It's pretty much just understand the concept and then allow the opportunity to arise for you to work.
So there's definitely in the substrate of mastering ourselves and kind of bringing in being comfortable in chaos. There's that element of awareness that the sage commander or or mindfulness, I'll say it that way, that sits at the root of a lot of what's there. And then if I can add in, just as kind of listening to, I'll say it in my words, sometimes society over domesticates us. And in that over domestication, we begin to think that avoiding conflict is the right thing to do. The reality is working with the conflict. So perhaps the right balance of wildness in our nature is necessary, but not so much that we hurt each other to the degree that it becomes overly destructive.
Yeah, I think, I think the best way I heard it described, especially if you're going to be a leader, there is some point in time when you will need to leverage power and you will need to be a presence for your team, right? To preserve your team and to make those decisions. There is a point where it's not bad. There will be conflict and you will have to stand, right, for that group of folks that's with you. So it is interesting. It's all about how you conduct yourself through that process, though, right? And I think that's really the key that I've seen. People are watching you and following you, and watching you as well. Holly, what do you think? I see you're nodding your head. Those mergers must be something.
No, I'm just I was thinking like from a leadership aspect of, feeling like again that I was on a leadership team in the previous company, but coming into a much larger company with a lot more layers of knowing which version of a leader that I need to be in which room that I'm in. There are times that I can over influence and maybe I shouldn't. And there are times that I really should be a little quieter and learn from the people in the room. So that's been a little bit of a balance on the conditions and the leaders and the outcomes, and very stimulating. But I can relate to everything that you're saying.
In the role I'm in now, when I interviewed very large, heavily matrixed organization, and the director of HR, she asked me, she said, "Hey, do you like that matrix environment? Are you good there?" And of course I wanted the role. And I said, "Oh gosh, I love it. I love people, love it, love talking to people." But the navigating of a heavily matrixed organization is significant, Holly. And I love what you said, like, what room are you showing up in, right? And who is that team that you're showing up to? And how do you present yourself in that space? It has been complex, probably one of the greatest learnings of my career. And it wasn't just enough to love people and to love, it was really that building of relationships and meeting folks where they were, right? Knowing the ground and navigating it.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Yeah, that it is a big learning experience for sure.
Yeah. I don't think I've done well every time I've been in a room, but I have learned.
Anything to add, Cynthia, before we go toward closing comments? But please.
Having experienced the art of war from a recipient as well as a server of it, when I met Sai, he came into our organization and they asked him for the worst project that they were having problems with. It happened to be my project that was given the challenge to the company, and it was more over resources, because you have resource managers and you have project managers, and that's a whole nother conversation as to who owns the resource and so forth. And so we were butting heads, the project manager and the resource manager, as who owns the resources and so forth. And me having lost my voice because of the dysfunction, he saw just an unbalance. But I was able to be coached from the art of war. He did later told me about the coaching manual, and then the opportunity arose for me to get trained to become a coach in that light. And so just to look at the two perspectives, more leaders, if they had the awareness about themselves and how they show up and how they're moving about because people are watching them, I think that would make them a better leader, because then they can speak from a place of empathy rather than sympathy. I hear what you're saying, but do you really hear what they're saying? Kind of thing. So I think both your points. The need is there, just to be reinforced every day for our leaders to not only be self-aware for themselves, but for their team, for all the moving parts that they actually influence.
Please chime in.
So I just wanted to thank you for this opportunity, because I did go back and reread the text, and it should probably be on an annual refresh cycle. And I read it recently thinking about talent development. We're always in a context of developing talent. And I read the Sage Commander again, and I thought, gosh, I have one of these on my team. And it was just so funny, because everything that, all of that brilliant, interacting with people and the patients, it was all there. And I thought, boy, I never thought about this in the context of, who has that. And I know, Sai, I think you probably saw it in Cynthia and pulled her forward, but it's an interesting concept to apply as you're looking at the future leaders of your organization, because there are people who are very natural in that dynamic. And I thought to myself, I thought, I'll have to use this context. I hadn't thought about it before from that perspective. So thank you for inviting me to the conversation and challenging me to read the text again, because I saw something different in this review.
You're very welcome. Believe me, as soon as I land anywhere, I'm on the hunt for other sages. And the good way to go is you got to find them and pull them out. And they're not easy to find by any stretch. I mean, definitively. So ladies, respectful. We need a part 2 is what I feel like. But I know we're short on time. Kind of closing comments from each of you, and then we'll close out. And you're always welcome to come back for part 2 individually, whatever you like. So, but please, closing comments, ladies.
Just want to echo kind of what Christine was saying. I was thinking about the Art of War and how it is kind of like a therapy book. Every time I read it, I think about I look at it through the lens of whatever experience I'm having at that time. So it's not something that I ever get tired of reading. It has a different viewpoint every time and a takeaway for me. So that to me has been a gift. So thank you for encouraging me to refresh for this.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, I hadn't thought about it in terms of male and female energy before either. It's very interesting. So I'll probably do another read and think about it in that context as well. So very much appreciate it. And thank you so much, Holly and Cynthia, for chatting. It was lovely to speak with you.
Likewise.
Christina, Holly. As always, every time I read, I'm finding something new that sticks out. And it's an annual read for me every year. And it's more to fan the flame, if you will, for what's already there. And so I'll end with this: conflict is inevitable, part of life. And just knowing that everything we need to respond, react in a wisely, thorough way is all right before us. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity to have this in my bag. It's been a pleasure, ladies. Holly, Kristen. Thank you, Sai.
Well, thank you, folks.
Likewise, everybody.
Thank you, folks, and thanks for the folks joining us. I want to leave, and if you have to jump off, please feel free. I know we're pushing time, but I just want to leave the audience and what have you with sort of a few key thoughts, in particular, the taking whole aspect. I love the way that you folks talked about intent that underlies all this. You know, what's the intent? If the intent is taking whole, we hold ourselves to how far we've gone, how far, and we always learn. So don't be too hard on yourselves, is my recommendation. I've read the Art of War. I read it regularly, I guess is what I'll say. Maybe even too regularly if you ask my daughter. She'll tell you. If nothing else, to the audience, it is a gentle reminder, to quote Pooh in particular, and this is directly from Pooh and his wisdom, always remember you're braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, right? Smarter than you think, and loved more than you will ever know. And that's words of wisdom, and that really anchors a lot of what is in the Art of War. And there's discipline, right? When you love someone, and there's harshness at times, not too much to destroy, but remain as much whole as possible. Ladies, an honor and a privilege, and you're always welcome back. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.